Hello and welcome to our Fire Safety at Work course. The aims of this course are to give you an understanding of the nature of fire, fire hazards and risk, fire prevention at work, local fire procedures and how to select and use a portable fire extinguisher safely. The reasons we do this training is because the East Lancashire Railway care about your safety. Many people are unnecessarily injured by fire at work each year, and because the law specifically requires employers to train their staff in fire safety. And of course, because fire risk assessments will flag the need to train staff, you, in fire safety. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin with some pre-course knowledge. What 3 things are needed for a fire to exist? What do you think is the most common cause of a fire in an office? What do you think is the average maximum time allowed for evacuation? What colour is a modern CO2 extinguisher? And what extinguisher would you use if your computer caught fire? The Bradford fire on the 11th of May 1985 went from 0 to full alight in 3 minutes. 56 people lost their lives. These are very poor standards of fire safety, and the majority of people watched the fire instead of ringing 999. What is the difference between a hazard and a risk? The answer is that a hazard is something with the potential to cause harm or loss, and a risk is the likelihood of that hazard will actually cause them harm or loss. Look around your room for fire hazards. How likely are they that they could cause or lead to a fire? So exactly what is a fire? It's a chemical reaction with the evolution of heat and light. Sources of ignition are smoking, electrical equipment heat or fault, heaters, contractors' tools and equipment, and of course arson. Here are some fuels, and these are office examples: paper and boxes, plastics, solvents, printer consumables, carpets, furniture and waste materials. In terms of fire prevention, please be mindful of fire safety. Don't block fire exits, call points or extinguishers. Observe the no smoking policy. Take care when cooking. Observe good security. Please don't wedge fire doors open. If you hear the fire alarm, leave the building immediately. Use the nearest exit. Walk quickly, but don't run. Please close the doors behind you. Do not delay your exit to collect your belongings. Attend the fire assembly point and report to the fire warden. Please do not return until you are told to do so. The fire procedure on finding a fire should be to sound the fire alarm and or shout fire. Fight the fire only if you are competent and confident it is safe to do so. Evacuate as per normal fire procedure and inform the fire warden. Fighting a fire. Do not fight the fire if you have not been trained. It is bigger than a waste paper bin. One extinguisher is not enough. Smoke is affecting your breathing. You cannot see the way out. Gas cylinders or chemicals are involved, and your efforts are not reducing the size of the fire. Get out. Fires are classified into A, B, C, D, E and F. A is a carbonaceous solid such as paper, wood or plastics. B are flammable liquids such as petrol, diesel and liquefiable solids such as candle wax. C, flammable gases, methane, hydrogen. D is metals, potassium, sodium, magnesium, etc. F is for cooking fats, and the class E, which is actually an American classification, is one in which electricity can be involved. but don't forget it can be involved in any class of fire. Let's take a look at which fire extinguisher you would use for which class of fire. A water fire extinguisher has a red body, as we can see in the photograph, suitable for use on Class A fires, wood, paper, etc. Not suitable for combustible liquids, cooking fats, not safe to use on fires involving electricity, and extinguishes fires by cooling. Foam fire extinguishers are a red body with a cream label, suitable for Class A and B fires, not suitable for use on fires involving electricity. Extinguishes by cooling and sealing the surface of a burning liquid. A dry powder fire extinguisher is a red body with a blue label. Best on Class B fires, but safe to use on any type of fire. These work by chemically interfering with the combustion reaction. A carbon dioxide fire extinguisher, red body with a black label. Best on Class B and C fires, but safe to use on any type of fire. Safe to use on fires involving electricity, and extinguishes by reducing oxygen levels and cooling the fire. A fire extinguisher blankets normally have a red or white label. They're for use on any type of fire, but best on small contained Class B fires and people on fire. Extinguishes by asphyxiation. When using a fire extinguisher, remember, pass. Pull out the pin, aim at the base of the fire, squeeze the handle, sweep. Pass, pull, aim, squeeze, sweep. In terms of your own safety at home, fit and maintain a smoke detector. Bin the chip pan. Fit MCBs in fuse boxes. Check round at night. Close doors at night. Don't smoke in bed, and prepare an escape plan.
Right, so good morning all. We're here to look at how to use a fire extinguisher. Hopefully you all got a chance, or those of you that got it, to have a quick look at the notes I've sent out, and they will be attached to this video as well later, so that people can have a look at them. So first of all, what's a fire extinguisher for? Yes, it's not to put fires out. A fire extinguisher is in order to protect you whilst you escape from a building. The only time you should ever actually tackle a fire with a fire extinguisher, other than in an emergency to protect yourself, is if you have been trained. So hopefully after today you would feel a bit more confident about how to use an extinguisher. But remember, I don't want anybody thinking I now know how to use an extinguisher and rushing into a building or whatever that's on fire to tackle it. It's there to protect you as you get out. If you're looking at a fire that you think you might potentially be able to tackle, think of the size of a waste paper bin. If it's any bigger than that, you will not be able to tackle it anyway and you want to be out. But basically, it's there to protect you getting out of the building, which is why you should find them at exit doors. Different types. Right, well, if we start with water extinguishers. Water extinguishers, you will know, well, all extinguishers now, by the way, should be red. There are some here that aren't, and I'll mention that in a moment. Extinguishers are red. Water extinguishers just have white writing on and nothing else. Foam extinguishers will have a beige panel, such as that. I don't know if you can see at the top of the panel, it's got here there's a beige line. Dry powder extinguishers, well, I've got one here. You can tell it's very old because it's blue, but it would be red with a blue panel across the top there. And then lastly, carbon dioxide, which is that one. So let's just make my nice list of them. And carbon dioxide, which doesn't really want to stand up very well on cobbles, has a black line along it. So you're looking for the colour, plain white, writing on a red background, cream panel, blue panel, or a black panel. So if we start with a water extinguisher, what can I do with that? What sorts of fires
Solid fuel.
Solid fuels, paper, coal, textile, wood. Yep. Foam, or as it will be, or should be shown, foam spray, wood, paper, coal, fabric. In other words, everything that this one can do, plus liquids. Dry powder, I'll come back to electrical in a moment, but liquids, and it can also extinguish a gas that's on fire. But under no circumstances, ever, even if you're trapped, do not ever consider putting out a leaking gas that's on fire. Why? Yes, because what you've done you've put out a flammable gas which is still leaking. It might not kill you from breathing the gas, but it will certainly kill you when it ignites next time, because then you won't be where you thought you were before. You might not even be in one piece to see it. So if there is a gas that is leaking and burning, there is only one way to put it out, and that's turn off the supply. Even if that means going 33 miles down the road to the next valve station, and I've been to one of those, that is what you would do in order to put the fire out. In the meantime, you protect anything around it. Carbon dioxide, it'll put out some burning liquids. That's about it. Very poorly. Right, electrical, a few of you mentioned. On that sheet that you were sent, it showed the classes of fire. There is another type of fire extinguisher. I'm not going to train you on it because it only appears in a couple of places on the railway, but that I'll explain it in a moment. But the classes of fire, so wood, so class A, liquid, B, gas, burning metals. What class is electrical fires? Yes, electricity can't burn, except if you're in America where they have a class E for electrical, but electricity doesn't burn. So what you're looking for, if the fire involves electricity, is either, and the best thing to do is switch the electricity off, or an extinguisher which will be safe if used when there's live electricity around. But they're not extinguishers for electrical fires. They will just be safe. And you'll know if they're safe because they should have on them that symbol. I'll just turn it around so you can see it. You see the flash? Yeah. That tells me that that extinguisher will be safe if I use it on live electricity. I won't get a shock. But carbon dioxide isn't actually for electrical fires. It's just safe if used on anything with live electricity. And it will be quite good if you've got something which is in an enclosed box, because it comes out as a gas and can get in there. But depending on what that enclosed box is, it might actually wreck whatever was in there anyway. So if it's a computer that's just starting to smoulder, carbon dioxide will probably do more harm than water. But if it's a computer that's starting to be on fire, you know what, it's probably going to be irreparable anyway, isn't it? Because they're so cheap, nobody's going to fix it. So that's the extinguisher I can use and the type of fires I can use it on. So straight away, by the way, dry powder will work on Class A, Class B and Class C fires, and would be safe for use on live electricity as well. So it's the most effective extinguisher we have. But it's the one I'm going to tell you should never use. And in fact, I would suggest that unless you go to what will be just one location on the railway, you should never find one. And that location will be by the fuel store at the bottom end of the shed, which is outdoors, and it's because there's a potential for a large running fuel fire, of which that would be the most effective. But we are going to set it off so you can see what happens when you do, and you can see why you would never want to do it inside a building. And the British standards now say that no building should be fitted with dry powder extinguishers unless they have a specific risk and the people have been specifically trained and will have the right equipment. And that right equipment would be at the very least a dust mask. Right, so that's the types of fires you can use them on. And the reason for those different types of fires is the way it puts the fire out. How do you think water puts the fire out? Cools it. The foam spray smothers it if it's a liquid. If it's burning fuels, like burning solid fuels, i.e. carbonaceous solids, it's cooling it. So it does a combination of cooling, smothering, and also does another thing, it does starving. Because when you've got a burning fuel, and you spray this on, it'll put a layer over the top of the fuel which keeps the fuel from the flame, keeps the oxygen from the fuel, but also stops the fuel escaping. So actually it does it all in one go. Dry powder, as ever again, it interferes with the chemical chain reaction. The powder itself is potassium bicarbonate mainly, so if you do get any up your nose or in your throat, you'll find it's got a very saltiness to it, but it can irritate, so I don't want you breathing it in. But what it does is it breaks up in the actual flame, and when it breaks up, the bits of it that break up become free radicals. Free the radicals! And they go, oh, actually we like all this rest of this stuff, so much so that it will react with all the other free radicals which are actually causing the chemical reaction that you know as combustion, and it turns that chemical reaction into something that isn't combustion, and the fire just goes out. So it's very, very effective, but unfortunately an awful mess. Carbon dioxide? Smothers it. Replaces the oxygen. The reason why it's particularly ineffective is because unless you've got something, and it is literally that waste paper bin, that I could maybe get the carbon dioxide to fill up, I need to put an awful lot of carbon dioxide into my space to make it such that it will put the fire out, which is why it will work quite well if you've got something like an enclosed box. You're going to inject through like the grills or whatever on an electrical box that's on fire to try and get the fire out inside it. And that's what the generator van's got fitted in it. That's the setting off, so it's got an automatic in there in the event of a fire, and it drenches the inside with carbon dioxide. Don't go in there when the bell's going. So we're going to go and give these a go now. First thing then, what I've told you already, which extinguisher under normal circumstances, if you were given that choice, would you go and pick up? Well, for a start off, look at the size of those two. Right. That one has the same firefighting capability as that one. Which one's going to be lighter? That one. And all of the extinguishers, as we're going around and replacing them, will be 6 litre foam spray extinguishers. We will be keeping some waters, and I've got particular reasons for those, which are really for taking on guards vans when you've got trains out where the guards van might be the only place where you might have an extinguisher, and water might be particularly useful there, just because of the little bit longer you've got with it. But in terms of the size of the fire you'll put out would be foam. But the other reason for using water for that is water comes out of the tap and it's basically free. The foam extinguishers, when we refill them, it's mainly water, but the foam concentrate is going to cost about £10 a time we set it off, so we'd rather we didn't set them off. We don't have to. Now, all of these ones you see here are out of date, and if anybody sees any extinguishers on the railway that don't have a pressure gauge on them, and you'll notice none of these have got a gauge, but where they have, there'll be a little gauge on here, except carbon dioxide, and you always know that because it's got this horn which might be black or green, but carbon dioxide doesn't have a pressure gauge because it is a pressure vessel. All the others have a pressure gauge. By this summer, at the latest, every extinguisher on the railway should be either carbon dioxide or one with a pressure gauge. So if you come across one that hasn't got a pressure gauge, then let me know, because it's one that we'll be looking to replace. And that's because all these old ones, inside here it's like a soda stream. There's a CO2 cartridge. When you squeeze the trigger, it pierces the seal on the top, then it pressurizes the extinguisher. We don't actually know until you do that whether it's going to work. Yes, if we take it apart and check, we should be fairly sure, but we don't know, whereas the one with the pressure gauge, you can look at it and tell straight away whether it's in pressure. And they're much easier to refill because, except dry powder, which would require dry nitrogen, all the others we can recharge with compressed air, so we can refill them ourselves here. And there's a number of stuff.
Is there a delay there when you squeeze it? Because I've never in my life let set.
Well, you're going to find out, because you are going to be setting one off, which is what you're here for. Right. So you will be finding out. By the way, dry powder, yes, there's a potential delay in dry powder if it hasn't been regularly maintained, because it's full of powder. And what's likely to happen to the powder when you leave it standing for some time? It's likely to compact. They are designed in such a way that when you squeeze the trigger to set it off, the pressure is then allowed to go down through, so it has two tubes inside it. When you squeeze the trigger, the pressure goes down one of the tubes inside in order to stir up the dry powder to force it back out of the other tube. All the others just need one tube anyway. But I have known that where you do that, nothing happens immediately. And then it suddenly starts, and that's just because it's taken this moment or two. And actually, if you pick one up and you turn it upside down a couple of times, you can actually feel that, and you can feel when it fluidizes, and you can start feeling it as if it's flowing like water inside. So we're going to set them off now then, the exciting bit. Most of them can be set off just over here onto the gravel. The dry powder we're going to take over by those trees and set it off into the trees. Not because it will cause anybody any particular harm. It's potassium bicarbonate, so it will break down naturally anyway. But the cloud of dust that comes off, all these cars would look like they needed a car wash very quickly, and people might not be so happy, particularly those with the nice new shiny looking cars around here. So we're going to try and do it so we don't end up covering everything with white powder. So, how do I set them off? Can you remember that from that instruction sheet? There's a four letter word, remember? Pass. So, pull the pin out, then the A, aim at the fire. Don't worry, I'm not going to squeeze it. Aim at the fire, and then the next thing is you squeeze the handles together, and then once it starts to discharge, you sweep across the base of the fire. You're going to get your extinguisher ready starting about here where we are now and move towards the fire. You will find that you've got about 2 meters of jet coming out the front, so you want to walk towards it starting further back. Don't go in and then set the extinguisher off. Start away, and at any time if you let go of the handle it stops again. So you can test where you are and think, all right, move a bit forward. But you do that until such time as you're actually hitting the traffic cone, and then what I'd like to see you do is actually finish off the extinguisher. We'll leave the dry powder and the carbon dioxides for now, so just in your own good time I'll go ahead and move the traffic cone. Pull out the pin, aim, squeeze. Right now, walk forward and attack the fire. Trying to keep, you would keep the, if you were walking towards it, you would keep spraying as you did so, but remember it's to protect you. And then when you think you're actually starting to have an effect, you could move in a little closer. Yeah, if I decide I am going to use an extinguisher because we're trapped, what should I ideally need? I want my escape route and
somebody else
with another extinguisher, because the extinguisher was to get me out. So as soon as I start to use it, I haven't got the extinguisher, it was going to get me out. So really you need 2 people.
That's not embarrassing. So you've taken the pin out?
Yeah, pin's out already, so just squeeze, aim and squeeze, and then just start walking towards. And there's nothing wrong with putting the extinguisher on the ground whilst you're doing it.
Okay.
So please don't feel embarrassed and just put it down, and then keep the you just need to keep the handle squeezed. Create a large area of it. It would be very, very effective if you had a fire in, for example, in the porter cabin. It would probably put it out wherever it was, but you won't be able to see to find your way out, and you'll have a throat full of dry powder and therefore quite probably a nasty cough for a couple of days. It's about as bad as you're going to be, but nonetheless.
Last week, put it in the drive and I've heard shit all over it.
So one of the things you probably see that happened there was actually when I set it off, I couldn't then stop it because the valve got clogged up with powder. It's been sat in there so long that the valve actually just stuck with powder as soon as I set it off, and there was that delay as well.
Are they normally meant to be controllable?
Yes. Yes.
Can we say if any of these are using
The effect.
Can you imagine that in a
That's
confined
it.
space?
I mean, it disperses relatively quickly, and in a good shower of rain, it'll just vanish. It doesn't dissolve straight away, but it will break down quite quickly. So that's it. That was dry powder. Fantastic stuff. You just don't ever really want to have to use it. Would you blast extinguisher type then? I did say there was another type that you'll find in the kitchens, and that's a wet chemical extinguisher. It looks a bit like foam in that it's got a cream panel, but the panel's actually more yellow than cream, and it says wet chemical. Those extinguishers will put out Class A and Class B fires, but they'll put out a special class called Class F, which was invented just by the manufacturers in order that they could then advertise the extinguisher as being a Class F fire extinguisher, and it stands for FATS. So it's designed to put out the enclosed burning fat fire like you would get in a chip shop or a commercial kitchen. And it has, instead of an ordinary hose like you've just used there, it has like a lance, a little bit like you might have on a weed killer, usually about so long, and then just like a spray head on the end. And it comes out much less forcibly than the other extinguishers because it's designed to come out as a fine spray, and it does a completely different thing in the way it puts the fire out on F class fires. It chemically reacts with the fat and turns it, or it emulsifies it, so it turns it into soap, a soapy type solution. So it actually converts it from something that will burn to something that won't. But you'll find those in commercial kitchens, and if you get the opportunity, there's one in Trackside Kitchen. But I'm not going to train on them because they're expensive to set off anyway, and you just treat them as you would any other extinguisher, like a foam extinguisher. The difference is that you don't need to get over the fire. You can do it at a distance, and because it comes out as a very, very fine spray. Why do you think that is?
So it won't spread the fat around.
It won't spread the fat around, that's exactly why. It's so you don't stir up the fat. Dry powder would work as well, but you'll wreck the rest of the kitchen. Carbon dioxide then. Yes, it's great if I've got an enclosed fire, but it's going to come out as a gas, so it's going to dissipate very quickly, and it would be absolutely useless out here at putting a fire out, unless maybe I had my bucket with it on fire. But if the wind's blowing strong, it probably will blow my carbon dioxide away before it blows the fire out. It's a similar process, but this time the aim is just by moving the horn to the position you want it to be in. Do not touch it, because what's in here is liquid carbon dioxide to about 2/3 up. The gas pressure is produced by the liquid carbon dioxide, obviously forming the gas above it inside, vaporizing. I was trying to think of the word. Which produces the vapor pressure, which then pushes the liquid carbon dioxide out through here, and it comes out in a fine nozzle in the center, but the shape of that means that the liquid very quickly turns to gas as it comes out. When it does that, it goes cold, about -70 degrees centigrade. So do not touch this. Some of the newer ones might have a horn. I think this is an example. No, this is an example. You see that horn's actually effectively insulated. Some of those which are insulated are green, and it's supposed to indicate that it's safer to touch it. But there's no need to touch it, because if you need to move it around, they're light enough that you can move the extinguisher around to sweep, or even just do it with the handle. The extinguisher itself will start to go cold, but not as cold as that will. And as an example, have you all seen dry ice, which is carbon dioxide? Well, one of the strange things that happens to liquid carbon dioxide when you release it is it will actually turn to a solid before it turns to a liquid. And I'll demonstrate that. By the way, when I do this, does anybody know what's going to happen?
Very, very loud.
It's going to be very, very loud. And it's important that you know that, because if you ever, I mean, you will after today have seen and had a quick go. And for this, by the way, there will only be time for you to have a couple of quick squirts, because these do not last very long. But we do have 3 to work with. But that very loud noise, it's meant to make that noise. If you hadn't ever heard it, you might think, oh my God, it's going to go off in my hand, and drop it and run away. Actually, that's not such a bad thing, because if that means you've run away from the fire, it's a good thing. But this is what happens. You see what I just created on the ground there?
Yeah. Snow. Yeah.
Don't go and put your finger in that snow though, or try and make a snowball with it, because your fingers would fall off if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Have you had a go yet? You can have a couple of squirts and then pass it along so that everybody gets a chance. Thank you very much. Oh yes, yep. And actually the way you were holding it was quite good, because it means you've got less chance that it's going to suddenly do that as well. So, hopefully that's been useful for you, and that you, the one thing I hope now is that whilst you train, you never have to actually use a fire extinguisher, but that at least if you do, hopefully you've got a little bit more confidence now than you would have had about what it's going to do when you actually set it off. But remember, they're there for your safety, getting out of wherever you are if you're trapped by a fire. I don't want any of you to go away from here thinking that you now are trained and therefore you can be the ones that rush in. That's what the fire service are here for. They'll come fully kitted out in PPE, which you won't have either, and they'll have an awful lot more water and so on behind them. Yours is there to protect you or other people in the escape from the building. Obviously, if it's a very small, incipient fire that you can deal with, and you've got an extinguisher, you will, but not at the expense of your own safety.